Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be playing Order of Battle Pacific, the new turn-based war game out by the Aristocrats and Slytherin and Matrix Studios, the publishers of the game. We're rejoining the Battle of Java Sea, already in the middle of the fight. You can see here that we have several warships which are currently engaged with the enemy forces here, and we've also got some air forces. We just purchased a torpedo bomber, which is incoming as well. So we're moving, kind of attempting to get a position here on the enemy. It looks like they've got some destroyers which have set up a bit of a screen around their fleet, and then they've also got a light cruiser here in the distance. There are some heavier elements, I assume, a little bit further out, as I am being stupid and trying to get my destroyer between their destroyers to launch a torpedo attack that ultimately misses and does nothing. I'm a little bit unsure of all the details of naval combat in this game. It's not quite as clear as far as, you know, how to go about it most effectively. It seems that you can move short distances, 1 or 2 hexes, and your gunfire still remains fairly accurate. But if you try and move more than that number of hexes, then your gunfire is incredibly ineffective, and you end up losing pretty much all ability to fire accurately. So it's kind of like if you're moving at flank speed and, you know, ducking in left and right and, you know, essentially trying to dodge enemy fire, you yourself lose almost all accuracy behind your movements. I hope the game doesn't look really blurry as these units are moving, as I'm kind of commenting over it. It looks like the recording may not have been ideal. I don't want to not show the video footage in the off chance that it looks okay once the video renders. Then you know, maybe this comment is irrelevant. But if it doesn't look okay, I still want to show the video because I don't want to just skip, you know, a 30-minute playthrough session or whatnot and have you wonder what the heck happened, since the last video did show up. But yeah, it's looking very blurry as units move around, which I don't think happened in the previous videos. I don't remember seeing that as an issue. So if the quality of this video is a bit lower, I certainly apologize for that. One thing, again, that I'd really like to know is what this little half circle, half star with a red emblem to the right of it represents by units as they move around here. You can see the American forces and Dutch forces are looking at getting into position against us. There's a big cruiser out there on their left. That's the USS Houston, which was the flagship of the U.S. Asiatic Fleet. And then there's also some lighter Dutch vessels. There's the De Ruyter's flagship right there that we just launched some torpedoes at. And we're bringing our fighter aircraft into bear. Again, support from other ships as possible as you attempt to bomb enemy ships. You could see there was anti-aircraft fire coming by a nearby destroyer against us. We've gone ahead and we've sunk another Dutch destroyer with relative ease, again, largely due to concentrating our fire against them. Our own heavy cruisers are losing pretty substantial losses here, and this is turning into a bit of a slugfest here as we move our ships in. The battleship Nagato probably moving too much there to be too effective as it launches some shells against. This is really, really distracting. I really hope the video doesn't look as bad as it does right now during my recording session as I move around the map. If it does, I might have to change recording software I've been using Fraps. It seems more convenient, but at the same time, the quality just right now is not where I want it to be. Alright, that's a little bit better here as I change the resolution here, at least in the preview, so it might have been me. So if you didn't see any problems with that, well, I guess that's my own fault. Anyway, it's currently February 20th, 1942 here. The actual Battle of Java Sea took place on February 27th, so we are about 7 days early. Interestingly enough, it was a Japanese escort force which was attempting to protect the invasion force that was going to be landing on the island of Java that prompted the engagement. The Dutch, the Americans, and the British sallied forth in an attempt to intercept a Japanese troop convoy. They had done that at the Battle of Balkapin and had sunk some 4 troop transports, or 4 or 6 troop transports, without loss. And the hope was Karl Dorman, the Dutch commander of the fleet and commander of the ABDA force, was hoping to intercept these troop transports and sink them and delay or prevent the invasion of Java. The Allies were heavily outnumbered. But in this engagement, it was kind of a running fight. It started at long range, and the Allies, that being the ABDA, kept attempting to close in on the transport fleet, but the Japanese escorting force kept preventing them from doing so. Now, the Allies had 2 heavy cruisers, the HMS Exeter and the USS Houston. Both were treaty cruisers that were built during the interwar period, so they were definitely products of the Washington Naval Treaty. The British cruiser had 6 8-inch guns, and the American cruiser had 9 8-inch guns, although by the time the Battle of the Java Sea took place, one of those 3-gun turrets that the U.S. cruiser Houston had actually been disabled by an aerial attack which had taken place previously. So the Americans were limited to just 6 8-inch guns on their vessel as well. The Japanese only had 2 heavy cruisers themselves, and on paper the force seemed to be fairly even. The Allies, not Americans, I keep saying Americans, I'm so American-centric, aren't I? The Allies had something like 9 destroyers and 3 light cruisers and 2 heavy cruisers. The 3 light cruisers were members of the Dutch force. I believe the USS Marblehead, which was another light cruiser, had already withdrawn, or maybe that was the 3rd cruiser, I'm not sure. But essentially they had 5 cruisers in total, 2 heavy cruisers, and 9 destroyers. The Japanese had more destroyers, certainly, but actually only had 2 heavy cruisers themselves. The big difference is the Japanese heavy cruisers had 8 or 10 8-inch guns, so they heavily outnumbered the Allies, who could only bring 6 10-inch or 8-inch guns to bear. You can see here the Americans are attempting to close in with their destroyers and launch torpedo attacks against our vessels. Now, as far as the ships were concerned, it was a running battle which took place essentially from the start of the day all the way to the end of the day, in which the Allies would continually attempt to close. They'd fail to be able to get a hold of the convoy, and then they'd be driven off. Air power, surprisingly enough, was not a substantial factor in this battle. The Japanese land-based bombers were largely socked in by rain, and the extreme range that they were operating against from the Japanese bases prevented Japanese air power, which had been harassing the Allied forces continuously throughout the entire campaign to this point, from being a substantial impact on the battle. It was a running battle that took place over maybe even hundreds of miles. The fight started at around 4 o'clock and didn't end until about 11 o'clock at night. So again, it was a running engagement. The actual initial phase of fighting was pretty inaccurate. Both sides launched large numbers of torpedoes. The American destroyers entirely exhausted their supply of torpedoes. The Japanese also launched large numbers of torpedoes, over 90 at one point. I had mentioned in the previous video, but the Japanese Navy at this time was very heavily reliant upon torpedoes as part of their surface fighting. And while all navies used torpedoes to a large degree, the Japanese specialized in torpedo warfare, much more so than other fleets. Their cruisers even were very effective in their use of torpedoes, which really wasn't the case as much with the American forces. Kind of reminds me back to the pre-dreadnought battleships, actually. The pre-dreadnought, I guess that's what they're called, the pre-dreadnought battleships actually used to carry torpedoes as well, interestingly enough. And you can see here that the force that was on the other side of our fleet has decided to engage our troop transports up there in the north. I don't believe I can lose more than one of them and still win the battle, so we're in a pretty precarious position where the enemy could, they're hitting the head of that convoy. We're going to have to send some forces up there to deal with them before they potentially, beat us by destroying too many troop transports. I'd be interested to see how the game handles a Japanese defeat here, if it would just cause a more difficult invasion of Java, or if it would entirely stop it, or just end the scenario and cause you to lose. You can see here our carrier is a pretty big target at the moment. The USS Houston just fired some shells at it, and some American destroyers are also going at it. I don't want to lose that. That would be a pretty big loss to lose a carrier. But anyway, so the Battle of Java Sea started at 4 o'clock. Both sides had very ineffective gunnery. The USS Houston was knocked out of the fight. Or I'm sorry, not the USS Houston. The HMS Exeter was knocked out of the fight relatively early. A Japanese 8-inch shell pierced into its boiler room and exploded. A boiler room in a warship essentially is a room where steam is built up in these giant turbines. You can see here the De Ruyter has been sunk. The enemy fleet is being thrown into disarray. Imperial headquarters have assigned more resources to us because of this. So yay. So we sunk the HMS, the HMS De Ruyter, Admiral Dorman's flagship. The De Ruyter named after the famous Dutch Admiral De Ruyter, who fought, I believe, in the 1600s against, was it the British at the time? And won some decisive battles then, one of the most famous Dutch naval officers of all time. That's who the warship was named after, and Admiral Dorman, a much less illustrious career, he was killed during the Battle of Java Sea. The Exeter was severely damaged and had to pull out of the battle early. It would be destroyed later at a follow-on engagement. The USS Houston would end up surviving the Battle of Java Sea, only to be sunk a couple days later, running low on fuel, launching a heroic attack, perhaps unaware. They basically ran into the Japanese invasion fleet of Tigilap, I believe it was, and did some substantial damage, knocking out several troop transports, sinking a minesweeper, damaging some Japanese destroyers, but in the end simply being overwhelmed and low on ammo and low on fuel. It was overwhelmed and destroyed. But the Dutch ships were not quite as lucky. Not that, I guess, obviously the Exeter and the Houston both sunk. I think 4 U.S. destroyers would end up fleeing after the campaign to Australia. I believe the rest were all sunk. But as it was, and the U.S. cruiser Marblehead would end up being severely damaged by air attacks and would pull out and survive itself due to the fact that it had to be withdrawn before the situation in the Dutch East Indies became so serious and so bad that the ships were all basically stuck there. The Marblehead was able to escape. But the Dutch cruisers were less fortunate. As I said, this was a running engagement, so by about 8 o'clock, the fleets kind of parted ways, and there were a few incidents where some ships ran into mines. There was an occasional spotting of the enemy fleet, but what ended up doing in the Dutch cruisers was late at night, around 11 o'clock, the two fleets came into contact with each other yet again, and the Japanese and the Dutch engaged in a intense night action, again with both sides' surface gunnery being relatively inaccurate and poor. The one decisive factor was the Japanese torpedoes. The long lances, over 12, or not 12, there was a large number of Japanese long lance torpedoes which were launched in the middle of the night, and over a half a dozen struck the two principal Dutch cruisers at the time, including the Dutch cruiser De Ruyter, and ended up destroying them, as well as killing Admiral Dorman. The battle largely eviscerated the Dutch surface fleet. It would end up spelling the doom of the Dutch East Indies, as the principal striking arm of the surface vessels was now destroyed, and the Dutch would be largely unable to do anything about the Japanese landings on the islands. Japanese air power was already dominant, and Allied air forces began to pull out of the Dutch East Indies shortly after this engagement, owing to the fact that there really wasn't going to be much that they could do to defend, and it was kind of an idea of get your aircraft, get your equipment out while you still can, and the islands themselves would fall within about a month, I believe, from the landings here. However, I believe the next scenario might actually be the land campaign in the Dutch East Indies, so we'll hold off talking too much about that. Suffice to say that the Java Sea was decisive. The Japanese torpedoes really are what made it a decisive fight. It would have been a setback for the Allies, suffering some damage to the Exeter as well as some of their other cruisers, but it wouldn't have been a decisive action if it hadn't been for the Japanese long-lance torpedoes, which turned a disappointing performance late at night, or a disappointing performance over the day into a disaster at night, as the fleet went from essentially one cruiser badly damaged and withdrawn, and 4 cruisers healthy to one cruiser. The Houston was relatively healthy and withdrew, so that was a heavy cruiser that got out. The Exeter was critically damaged, and then 2 cruisers were sunk in the middle of the night. So yeah, I mean, essentially they lost half their cruiser force in that late night long-lance torpedo attack. But anyway, so you can see here we went ahead and purchased a new dive bomber squadron, and are able to deploy it right on top of our carrier in the middle of the ocean. Meanwhile, we're going to go ahead and purchase another cruiser, a Mogami class heavy cruiser. Unfortunately, we can't throw it in the middle of the battlefield, as realistic as that would be. And really, the only place it looks like we can deploy it here is on the northern edge of the, I don't know what you want to call it, northern edge of the battlefield. So we'll have to try and get them in range, because the Allies are being frustrating, to say the least. The Houston is launching some devastating attacks. Our destroyer force is getting whittled away, and really the only strength that it feels like we have left is our battleship. The rest of the fleet is being devastated, and we are inflicting some casualties on the enemy, but I'm definitely having some learning curves with how to utilize surface combatants in this game. There's still quite a bit to learn there, and you can see some new enemy ships just showed up. Is that an Australian or a New Zealand? I think that might be an Australian ship. I don't recognize the logo at all. So my guess is it's an Australian one, just because we've seen everybody else's flag in the ABADA force. We haven't seen the Australian ship. I believe actually the Perth was a Royal Australian warship, which was took part with the Houston in its final engagement. Was it the Sunda Strait where they fought? Where I mentioned that the American ship kind of stumbled into the enemy landing fleet there and fought valiantly but was defeated. It wasn't alone. There was another ship with it. I believe it was the Perth, which was a Australian cruiser, I want to say, a light cruiser, which fought alongside the Americans there. You can see here we just landed some aircraft on our carrier, and I know I mentioned this in the very first video when we were talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Torpedo planes can actually be rearmed with bombs. I'm not sure if they're as effective with the bombs as dive bombers, or perhaps more effective. I don't know if maybe they can carry a heavier bomb because they're used to carrying torpedoes. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. I didn't decide to rearm them. I basically just landed them, and I'm going to take them right back off. Wanted to get them full of fuel again, and was using kind of the cool down period with the torpedoes to accomplish that. So, as you can see here, our ships are now caught between the two fleets. That was something I was very concerned about early, and being slowly whittled down, or not so slowly anymore. Our battleships, the only thing still at full strength. Our destroyers are almost gone. We've got, one light cruiser as well left, so we're in some trouble. We've also got a destroyer down here in the south. Oh wait, no, that's our fighter aircraft. I'm dumb. Alright, so a bunch of ships have been sunk, and our gunfire, interestingly enough, for as indecisive as the gunfire was during this fight, the gunfire is being far more effective here in this engagement of the game than was in reality, which is fine. Again, the game doesn't model reality 100%, and I think you have to make gunfire a little bit more effective, because it was in later fights, especially around the Guadalcanal campaign. But at least here early in this actual first battle, gunfire was largely ineffective during the Battle of Java Sea. You can see here the enemy is straddling our battleship, focusing heavily on our battleship with their cruisers. Fortunately, our armor is allowing us to be largely resistant to their attacks, although we did lose 1 hit point there when the Exeter, I believe it was, fired against us. This wouldn't be the first time that the Exeter engaged an enemy capital ship. The Exeter was seriously damaged in 1940 in a fight with the German pocket battleship Graf Spee. It was debated, her damage was so severe, it was debated that maybe the ship should be scrapped and sunk at the Falklands as kind of a hulk. But in the end, she was sent back to England, where she was refitted, and then eventually sent to the Pacific, where she was sunk shortly after the Battle of Java Sea. The first fight that the British had against the Graf Spee actually in the 1940s is pretty interesting, because the Germans certainly seemed to dole out more damage than they received, and yet they were driven into harbor, safe harbor. They did suffer some serious damage, but not anywhere near the likes which the British suffered. Yet the Germans probably didn't know that, and then by the time the Germans withdrew into that port in Argentina, it was more or less too late, because the entire British fleet in the area was converging on them. So yes, they may have had some advantages at the tactical level. The ship wasn't in any condition to try and get away from the rest of the fleet, which was closing in, and that's what ended up leading to the scuttling of the ship as well. So you can see here torpedoes don't seem to be very effective here against these destroyers, probably because their ability to maneuver more effectively. What I think would be interesting is if you could compound the damage of a destroyer, so perhaps, or not destroyer, of a torpedo. So it'd be kind of cool if you kind of had like a plus factor of torpedo attacks, where you could launch kind of like a salvo of torpedoes, the way that was usually used during the surface engagements of the time, where it's not like you just have one ship fire off its torpedoes. You'd send 4 or 5 destroyers in, they'd all fire off all of their torpedoes kind of in a salvo, which would make it more difficult for an enemy force to evade those torpedoes. I think if the game had that aspect in it, it would be really neat. Again, it's maybe beyond the scope of this game to try and include something like that, but just kind of a combat modifier. You know, if you've got multiple ships launching torpedoes at a single ship all at once, it would become more effective or something like that. And maybe it does. I guess I haven't really tried that yet. I've been pretty ineffective in my use of torpedoes. So maybe if you do launch multiple ships, torpedoes all at the same ship at once, it'll be more effective. You can see we're moving in toward the closing phase of the battle. We're at turn 24 of 30. We still have 2 troop transports that are safe here up in the north. The enemy is concentrating their fire largely on our battleship here. Fortunately, that fire is fairly ineffective. I also noticed that it doesn't seem like the fire does a whole lot to make the ships less effective. Like, you know, when you get large numbers of artillery strikes against you, you become kind of disorganized, or you become suppressed or what have you. That doesn't seem to really happen here with surface warships, fortunately. There's certainly, I don't know if that would really be a factor or not. I mean, it's not like you're suppressed, you're inside an Iron Hulk, but I still have to imagine being under a rain of heavy fire would have some kind of impact to your ability to resist effectively. I'd have to think about that here. Continuing to try and sail the Mogami cruiser to our fleet's aid, we've got 2 destroyers left, and then the battleship, and that's it. Oh, don't forget the aircraft as well. But we've also got some torpedoes we can use now. We can go ahead and drop the torpedoes from that torpedo bomber, and it will end up seriously damaging the USS Houston, which is now down to 2 in terms of its strength. Move our destroyers here closer to our battleship, hopefully to draw some fire from the enemy. And then we can use our dive bombers to hit this destroyer here and this one here. And there you have it. So we just sunk another enemy destroyer. There's another destroyer over here badly damaged. The USS Houston was also crippled largely by that torpedo strike. And our battleship can... What should we do? Should we finish off the Houston? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So the USS Houston, one of the 2 enemy heavy cruisers, is now sunk. I'm not sure how well other warships will be able to hit our battleship. I don't know if the game models armor penetration or not. I don't think it does, but I will say that obviously it models some... No, it does. It models defense, I guess, heavy or soft defense. So it does model it to some kind of very abstracted degree, which makes sense given the scale of the game. Our fleet getting crushed between the two enemy forces now. Although I believe the only ship left in their northern force is that one light cruiser. So that destroyer was sunk. Our other destroyer probably about to be sunk. And our battleship damaged as well. Oh, nope, the Exeter's shooting at our carrier. Don't want to lose that either. I have not fought this battle very well. Let's see here. Really? No damage at all? It's going to inflict nothing? Alright, I guess we'll use this destroyer to finish off the enemy destroyer here while we still can, while we can still do something with it. And I think that's all of the enemy destroyers here on the map are destroyed. They've got 3 light cruisers and a heavy cruiser left. So that's what's left of the enemy air power. And, oh, that's why it couldn't do anything, because it was a torpedo bomber. So when the torpedo bombers are not, when they have that cooldown period, dive bombers don't have a cooldown period. They can just keep dropping bombs as long as they want until eventually they run out of fuel and need to go and land. Torpedo bombers, on the other hand, when you drop a torpedo, they have to wait 3 or 4 turns before they can drop another torpedo. They can strafe an enemy unit, but that's just regular gunfire is not going to do much against an enemy ship here. Pulling the carrier out a bit, continuing to fly our scout plane around, and the turns are going much quicker now that we have very few units left. The enemy is certainly focusing their gunfire against our battleship here. Largely ineffective again, although they're slowly whittling it down here. You can see they did knock 1 more hit point off, so it's almost at 50% strength. Oh no, they knocked 2 off that turn, so it's down to a 5 strength of an initial of 10. Certainly not good, but hopefully our air forces can provide a difference here as they slowly damage the HMS Exeter. Again, the air forces were not a critical factor in the engagement. You can see here we can launch some torpedoes with our destroyers against that enemy cruiser and do a little bit of damage as well. Continue to strafe them and do nothing. And our battleship also seems to, as it's getting whittled down and damaged a bit, is having less effective firepower against these enemy ships. Just because it's a weaker unit, it can't do quite as much damage. Maybe, again, that kind of would represent the idea of a ship maybe having some turrets knocked out. We mentioned that the Houston historically had its turrets knocked out, or one of its turrets knocked out before this battle even began. As a fight goes on, maybe a shell pierces a turret and kills everyone inside and makes the turret ineffective for the remainder of the battle. But we're starting to run low on time. Essentially, I guess the key is we need to survive, and we also need to make sure our troop transports survive here as we close in. We've only got, 3 turns left here as the enemy continues to bombard our battleship there. We're down to 4 hit points against it. I'd rather not lose that ship. Cost over 200 to get, although I'm probably going to spend just as much as I spent to get the unit in the first place to replace all of its losses now at this point. The Mogami-class cruiser is sailing into range, although we had talked about the ineffective gunfire of a ship that has been sailing at long distance and high speed, so it's engaged now, although it didn't do anything that turn. Our destroyer doesn't have the gunfire ability to really do anything for us at this point. We do have more torpedoes for our torpedo bombers, so I think we'll go ahead and use those. I don't know why I decided to close range with the Australian ships. That was not wise. But my battleship is able to finish off the HMS Exeter, so the only other Allied heavy cruiser has now been sunk. There are 3 light cruisers left, and our torpedo bombers just destroyed 4, or just knocked out more than half the remaining firepower of that enemy cruiser. So all forces involved are very, very battered. There's 1 ship left at full strength, and the battle is nearing its end. You can see here, it looks like rain has started falling this turn, so a rain squall has kind of appeared, and it looks like the enemy fleet, or at least some of the ships, are starting to pull away from us. So maybe we've won this battle. Maybe the enemy's trying to withdraw, which would be a nice victory here if they try and pull out, as historically was the case. Once a certain number of their ships were destroyed, they attempted to pull out. Interestingly enough, the Droider wasn't sunk until after they had attempted to withdraw from the battlefield. But you see here a shroud of rain has fallen over the Java Sea, and the enemy ships are using the decreased visibility in an attempt to escape. So we'll keep our scout plane on, but it doesn't seem like the rain prevents us from being able to bomb the enemy. It just might maybe make us less effective. So that's interesting. I know the Panzer Corps game used to prevent air power from really being able to do anything in the rain, whereas this game doesn't seem to do that. So that's a nice difference there. Meanwhile, it is making our aircraft somewhat less effective here. We do have another destroyer left, so I didn't realize that. We didn't lose that destroyer. The cruisers here are closing in from the north. Still probably too long a range to really be effective at anything. And we're attempting to finish off that enemy cruiser. I'd like to destroy all of them, but I don't think I'm going to have the time. We've only got 2 turns left here. The battle really turned into a slugfest. Not really much in the way of tactics. That's interesting, though, is, you know, the maneuvering aspect, making ships less accurate, is interesting. But it seems to take out what limited ability for tactics there might be in a hex-based game, because of the fact that you can't really, you know, if you maneuver, you can't shoot. But really the principal advantage in a naval engagement is trying to maneuver your opponent into a position where you're able to bring more guns to bear than they are. But in a hex-based wargame, that doesn't really seem to apply. One area that might apply is in terms of air attacks, because as we mentioned, ships can support each other through their anti-aircraft fire, which isn't something that is possible with surface fire from what I can see, or what limited I've been looking at it. It doesn't seem like ships really support each other when it comes to surface gunfire, but they do support each other when it comes to anti-aircraft fire, interestingly enough. You can see there we just sank one of the enemy cruisers, and we really are closing in on the final moments of this battle. I don't think we'll destroy that last enemy cruiser in the next 2 turns. We simply don't have the firepower to do it. But we've destroyed the bulk of the enemy fleet as they're pulling out. You can see our troop transports are now shifting west to move toward the Java coast, probably bringing in and landing troops on the coast here shortly. We'll try and bring this enemy ship under fire and attempt to sink it. Looks like we've got torpedoes we can launch against them now. Still, I doubt we'll be able to finish them off. Yeah, we'll cripple them, but we're not going to sink them. Especially given the fact that they're running full speed ahead, so again, that makes our gunfire less accurate. But we did damage them pretty severely. Meanwhile, we should be able to get that aircraft down onto the carrier here before they run out of fuel, which we do, and we end the turn, and we win a victory. So both the northern and eastern invasion fleets have successfully crossed the Java Sea. Combined with the defeat of Allied naval forces in the area, the operation is a success. So now we can choose a specialization between forced labor, which allows us to generate resource points by damaging enemy units with 0 supply, or the Tokyo Express. The Tokyo Express, I think, will be more useful for us. Destroyers and submarines provide +1 coastal supply. I understand it, that I totally misunderstood how serious supply is in this game, so I think I'll talk about that in the next video, because it's a very important aspect of the game, which I haven't been focusing too much on. I've been kind of missing its importance in the game. You can see here the next scenario is the actual invasion of Java, so tune in for that. And until next time, everyone, thank you for watching this video. Thanks for supporting the channel. And this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.